Good evening. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I invite you to join us. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Speaking of liberty, our Lady Liberty is gone. Hope somebody brings her back. Roll call, please.
Gehrig?
Here.
Grinberg? Pepcorn?
Here.
Strand?
Here.
Mahoney?
Here. Fire. Off-duty firefighters are conducting their annual MDA Fill the Boot campaign today through Wednesday at the area Hornbacher stores. The campaign raises money to send children to the MDA summer camp. So when you're getting groceries, maybe put something in the boot. Fargo Fire also has another area has first responder agencies participating in the active assailant exercise last week. Participating in these exercises allows all agencies to practice and understand response guidelines that direct activities in these types of incidents. The exercise was possible from a grant to the Cass Fargo Emergency Management through North Dakota Department of Emergency Management. And we do have a response to a active shooter in schools so that the staff all knows what to do. Parents and guardians are reminded to make sure student immunizations are up to date before school starts. The immunization walk-in clinic for K-12 students will be held at the Fargo Cass Public Health on August 8th. Residents are encouraged to contact their insurance company ahead of time to verify immunizations provided by Family Care Public Health are covered. For those without insurance, they can receive immunizations at a reduced rate. World Breastfeeding Week is August 1st through August 7th with the theme Empower Parents, Enable Breastfeeding. Fargo Cass Public Health supports new moms with its Back to Work Mom program, which offers free classes and resources for new moms who plan to breastfeed. The next class takes part at August 13th at Essentia Health. The police department held a swearing-in ceremony last week for 2 new officers who have completed the police academy. They now start the 17-week police training officer program. This helps the recruits apply the knowledge they attain in the academy. In talking to Chief Todd, it's always interesting to me how long it takes before a police officer is really on the street on their own. And that's almost 6 months, Dave, that's what it is? So it takes them a while before they get out there on their own and taking care of everybody. Fargo's PD Creative Services producer Scott Kramer has produced a video featuring the excellent work of the community trust officers and how this now includes the art of Fargo Cass Public Health, Fargo Police Substation. Please enjoy. This is our latest endeavor.
Youth growing up in this generation are understanding that law enforcement may not be their friend, it might be their enemy, and we don't believe that's the case at all. So what we're trying to do with the Community Trust Officer program is change perspective by doing programs that influence kids and help benefit their lives, and that's what we're trying to do every day. Bringing art to youth is so valuable because a lot of youth are looking for ways to express themselves. In the past, we've done music so often, and how they could take music and use that as a way to express their pain or express their feelings or emotions. So now bringing art, that's another avenue. We're teaching youth a whole new art form on graffiti art, on mural art, on paintings, on illustrations. And it's just a way for them if they're going through pain, if they're going through loss in life, if they're trying to figure things out, they can then express that in a whole new way and grow in their gifts and grow in their talents if that's something they want to pursue one day.
It's been a blessing to me. It's a gift, but I think it's honestly one of the best gifts you can have because I can honestly create whatever I want to see, whatever I can imagine, and you could also put it to good use. Say a message without having to tell somebody, you could just show them.
I think having more art in Fargo, one, will just make the city brighter, and it's going to make the city more modern. Our city is growing at a fast pace, and it's going to be really wonderful to see just as more art goes up, our city's going to become more modernized and more influential because I think each art piece will tell a story, and for us at our police department, we want our piece to tell the story of the Community Trust Officer program and how we love to work with youth in the community, how we seek to influence them and impact them, and just introduce them to new avenues and ways to express themselves and their creativity. Our hope is that when youth see art, they become inspired to become artists in whatever form of art that is, music, painting, dance, you name it. We just want to inspire youth to become creative and walk in their full potential in life.
all done?
Youth growing up in this generation are understanding that law enforcement.
Officer Bloom was at TEDx last week and showed some of his skills as well, which the crowd really enjoyed. They thought we had a hip police department. Approve the order agenda. Is there a motion to approve the order agenda, moving item 3 from consent agenda to regular agenda to be discussed as item 35?
If we attach that to H, also move.
Oh, 35H, sorry. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the July 15, 2019 regular meeting?
I so move. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye for you too, Tony, I think.
Yes, I'm sorry, aye.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda items 1 through 33, excluding item 3, which has been moved to the regular agenda?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Strand,
Yes.
Gehrig,
Yes.
Grimberg,
Aye.
Pepcorn,
Aye.
Mahoney.
Aye. Item 34, update on the Civic Plaza. Nicole Crutchfield and Scott Bishop to explain.
Good evening. Scott is here to give you a brief update, but maybe just so you understand how this fits into the process, since it's a little unique. Probably soon, hopefully in the next 2 to 4 weeks, we'll be bringing back in front of you a GMP, gross maximum price. And that is based on previous action that the City Commission took that allowed us to go out for an RFQ, request for qualifications to look for a construction manager at risk. And then last agenda, City Commission agenda, we had a contract in front of you with McCoff that was on consent agenda, but that was for pre-construction services. So what that does is allow McCoff and Scott Bishop to coordinate this next level of design. So what's in front of you today is basically the final design or concept design for the Sodbuster Plaza part of it, so just phase 1. And then Scott might touch a little bit on the other part of the plaza, which has its own timeline. So really just the more developed part, which is the Sodbuster Civic Plaza landscape, and then the other big picture stuff, which has its own timeline. So I'll be here to answer any questions after Scott's presentation.
Good to see you all again. I'm going to try to keep this brief. As Nicole said, I just want to make sure that you all are kept abreast of the process as we move forward. And we're reaching some key and critical milestones as we try to move forward with the Sodbuster portion of this work. At the same time, I think it's really important that you all understand how this will fit into the Civic Plaza as a whole. And that is important because I don't want you to believe that what we're developing now for Sodbuster is going to somehow be separate from what we're developing from the plaza. It is a little trick, but we're used to, as designers, working in a non-linear fashion. So we're equipped to do this kind of thing. And one of the things that we talked about a little bit before was this idea of an organizational system, the fact that, inherent to this place, inherent to the fact that you're in a glacial lake, an ancient glacial lake, that there's been this deposit of soils and clays, and they've developed this prairie. This is actually how your soils work on multiple scales, and it gives you a unique condition, as we've talked about before. But you can see this inherent geometry in this particular image, and it's one of the things that we're using to actually create that organizational system for the entire site. And there are behaviors that also arise as part of this matrix condition. And so, in fact, we can use the idea of crackles to help us organize the site in a number of ways. So last time we looked at a series of programs and activities that could occur on the site, as well as amenities. And now we're looking at designing both those programmatic spaces and aspects of how we integrate amenities into the plaza, looking at that organizational system. So whether or not it's gathering spaces or how we actually deal with hydrology on the site, It all is something that starts to tie the site together as a functional ecology, as well as a way that binds the different programmatic elements together as a unified space and design. And we can look at both hardscape elements, water, softscape elements. Each one of these things gets an inherent character that works at multiple scales, just like it does with the soil itself. So whether or not it's a custom bench, or a series of terrains, or a bike path that we know is going to cut across the site, all of these things work together, again, to create a unified identity for the Civic Plaza. Also, one of the things that we look to do is to tie that together in a larger scale system. While this is what we would call a control framework, it will be somewhat altered by the overall organizational system over time, but we know that we have to connect the buildings to the roads. And we know that we want to have a plaza, so that's going to give us a certain slope. And that's actually what's allowed us to create the sodbuster landscape, because without these types of control plans, we wouldn't know what we're targeting, and that would lead to a disjunct about what we're trying to do now and what we want to do in the future. And so that also helps us to understand hydrology and where things are going to flow and how we might be able to alter those at a smaller scale utilizing the organizational framework. In essence, the concept is that by having this organizational framework, we can insert all of those different programs and amenities into the system and ultimately create a unique and beautiful place for you all. And so what you will see is that we've actually taken that. You get to see a little example of how we're going to do that with what we're doing with Sodbuster, and how some of these elements turn into not just cartoon drawings, but actually a physical space. So just to give you, again, to now jump to Sodbuster, where you will see some of that in action, and we should hopefully see that under construction at some point in the next few months, with your authorization, of course. So one of the things that I had to do in order to make sure that we could do this was to meet with the artist's widow, Susan Jimenez. So last week I was in New Mexico at her studio in Hondo, and that you can see right behind me is actually one of the sodbusters. That is not our sodbuster. That is a different sodbuster, but I could actually see it, and we were taking measurements. And a very, very wonderful person. And my goal there was to make sure that she had complete buy-in into how we were going to do the install, and as well as the landscape that was going to surround that sculpture. I would like to say that I was successful. So that's great news, which means that we can continue on instead of rebooting this entire process. But I wanted to show you what this plan looks like as of now. This is our latest site plan. And what you can see is we've taken a lot of those elements that were requirements, these viewing platforms, as well as talking about that materiality, which we talked about before, the stone, the brick, and how we start to integrate into this kind of larger scale patternation that helps us organize the site. Surrounding Sodbuster is this landscape, a prairie landscape, which is what the artist originally intended as Sodbuster works through the prairie to cultivate. As well, the interesting part about that was the orientation, very much so. The idea that emerging from this riparian forest, Sodbuster comes up into the prairie of the west, and continues the westward movement and progress. That was actually definitely part of the original inspiration for the piece. Depending on the resolution of your screens, you can also see how we use the multi-scalar idea of the crackle. You also see that we're connecting a little bit higher up to the library entrance so that we can maintain those key and critical grades as we tie this together for the future. And in essence, part of how we think about this is if you kind of divide this site in half, one half to the north and one half to the south, that we're really putting in the permanent and key critical program elements, the library cafe terrace being one of those, which can also serve as a small performance space, Right above that is a berm that people can sit on to view those performances. That's permanent. That will become forever part of the plaza, versus the stuff that we have above that, which is a tree nursery, so that we can grow those trees for the future and get those going right now, so that when we put the plaza together, we will have trees that are fitting and of good stature. You can see here the view from 4th Street. So Sodbuster really emerges from this prairie. The viewing platform that you see in the foreground of this image will have signage that we're developing with Susan. So we'll talk a little bit about the artist's inspiration, a little bit about the history of the sculpture, and honestly, any other aspects that she would like to put forward. And you can see again that the multi-scalar patternation of the crackle in this, as well as the different elements that we have. We're looking to use thermally modified wood, which lasts for a long time, and we can use local timber sources rather than getting timber from the tropics. And so looking to integrate all of those things, as well as some seating elements. It will actually be a really nice space to sit and view the sculpture. As well, from the other view, you can see kind of emerging up from the riparian forest area, we have the cafe terrace that will be adjacent to the library. Again, these chairs can be folded up and moved for performances or for other events that the library is looking to hold, and then kind of making your way up into the city, which I think is a great another aspect of this, is that Sodbuster is leading the way to the downtown of Fargo. These are really just the material palette that we're looking at. So we're continuing to get the kind of buff brick pavers that are consistent with the types of clays that you would see in and around Fargo, as well as making sure that the type of prairie that we have is North Dakota prairie and not a Minnesota prairie or a Montana prairie, right? We want a tall grass prairie. And we're actually working with the manufacturer to create that stamp that we can use later on for the plaza. So we'll have that, we're looking to develop that and move that forward for consistency in later phases. We've worked with the construction manager already. He's received the schematic designs. We've gotten confirmation that we're within a range of budget with the schematic design. We've just finished and submitted our design development drawings. They're going to review that. We're going to talk to them tomorrow about any comments that they have about constructability and timeline, and then they will look to put together the GMP with their subcontractors. They've already notified the subcontractors, so this should be a bit of a truncated process. We will continue to work on the construction drawings while they are in bid, so by the time everybody's wrapped up, that we're actually ready to go and hit the ground running. That's what it's going to take in order for us to actually pull this off. So we're hoping, as Nicole said, to be back to you in 2 weeks with the outcome of that process, and we'll say, all right, this is what we believe it's going to take. And if necessary, we can look at figuring out how we manage the budget at that point. This is basically the construction manager's timeline. Again, the Gantt chart, it's a very tight timeline. We're doing the best to not lose track of what that means. We can certainly distribute a printed copy of this if you need to or a digital copy in order to zoom in where necessary. Right now, we are doing our best to stay on track and make sure that we can actually install this at the end of September, beginning of October, as we originally had planned. We haven't seen a significant delta in that timeline yet, so we will, let's say, put the pedal to the metal and keep it down there. So, in essence, the next steps is looking at how the GMP comes in, making some decisions if we need to about how we value engineer portions of that or give you options to do so. And then moving forward, getting your confirmation of that, and then moving into construction. And that is my update. If you
Very
guys
good.
have any questions,
Any
please let me
questions,
know.
Commissioner Pipcorn?
Just a couple. So was there a timeline that we had to have the sod buster installed by? Was there an agreement, or can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I believe the part of that is the agreement in terms of the museum's commitment to have that installed in the Civic Plaza, which was what was agreed to. And again, that timeline diverged earlier on, and so we're trying to make good on that promise. The key is that we can have an opening when the weather is reasonable, which is why we're shooting for that late September, early October timeline. It has to be installed by the end of this year. Otherwise, there'll be a loss of that grant money.
One more question. So we've talked about you're going to have some information about the piece outside.
Yeah.
I thought inside the library, it'd be cool if we eventually had something where we were like a little bit of a home for, maybe she would be interested in moving a lot of the information about his artwork, especially when it's right there by the library. That'd be kind of cool. Have you talked a little bit about that?
Yeah, I did talk to Susan about that. There's a wide body of work, and we try to convey how important this work is, being one of the first commissions. I think it was the first commission by Jimenez. And I think she is also looking to make connections between the cities that have those different works. The museum has several other pieces that are actually key and critical. And we talked about even potentially putting up an exhibit for the opening in the library so that we could see some of the work together. And so I think that's an ongoing conversation, and I think it'd be really, really cool, honestly.
Anybody else? Thank you, Scott.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
We'll go to public hearings. Item 35A, transfer of Class A alcoholic beverage license from Firebox, doing business as Firebox, to International African Club and Nightclub, doing business as International African Restaurant and Nightclub, at 4554 7th Avenue South. Denial recommended by Liquor Control Board to continue, and it was continued from 7:1 and 7:15 regular meetings. Steve Sprague to explain.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. So a little history with this application. We received it and did our background check, and it came to Liquor Control Board in June, and we had a felony showed up on the original application. And so prior to it coming to this body for a public hearing, the applicant removed themselves and replaced with their wife. So at that point, then we brought it back to Liquor Control, redid our background check and investigation, and so now it's here before you today. Liquor Control did vote 4-1, recommending denial, primarily based on the credit history of the now applicant. There are two significant loans out there, or two personal loans that total about $15,000, and then three credit accounts that are still open out there that total about $3,000. So a total of about $18,000 in outstanding loans and debt. Additionally, this afternoon, the Assistant City Attorney did a little bit of a record search with the state, Secretary of State's office, and found that the International African Restaurant still has the original applicant listed as the registered agent on this. I don't know if there's any questions.
Chief Todd, are you up for a reason, or? Just ready, okay, so no comment. Commission. I'm sorry. Is there any public wishes to speak on this application? Come to the podium, state your name, please.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Baird. I'm an attorney here in Fargo. My office is located at 112 North University Drive, Suite 120. I'm appearing on behalf of the applicants in their request to transfer this license. Now in the Liquor Control Board, concern was raised about Imbalu Brown's credit history and her credit worthiness for this license. And these concerns were the basis for the recommendation not to approve. But our position is these concerns should not be a reason to deny this request. As shown on her credit history, she does have 3 credit accounts which have large balance, most of which have been deemed a loss by their holders. These were not credit accounts which she had opened herself and refused to pay back, however. These were opened by her ex-husband during their previous marriage in her name without her knowledge, and charged up quite significantly by him. As the marriage was coming to an end and these facts came out, she declined to pursue any sort of criminal remedies that may have been available, but after the marriage ended, she did continue to pay on those accounts for some time while she was able to, and then eventually just kind of let them go along with the marriage and tried to wash her hands of it. It seems remarkably unfair that she should be penalized with a denial for her previous victimization by her ex-husband. In addition to those accounts, there were a couple of old accounts which were in collections, which, when they were brought to her attention, she'd paid those off. And the payoff information about those was not available in time for the previous Liquor Control Board meeting, but they have been made available now. I know I've made them available. I don't know if you have copies of them. If you need them, I have copies with me for you if you'd like them.
So is she taking care of all the credit issues?
The very large amounts, the 10,000, 3,000, I don't remember the other amount off the top of my head. Those ones she has not paid off. Those were the amounts that were opened by her ex-husband in her name in an instance of identity
The ones
theft.
she is open, she's taking care of.
Right, the ones that were actually hers, she has taken care of completely. In the discussion of the transfer request, the specter of Romo's was raised. And whatever issues Rodolfo Romo may have had that led to his choosing to disappear, they don't exist in this case, and I don't feel that it's a fair comparison between the two. For one thing, this is not a single owner restaurant. This is a two-person LLC. There are two owners, and should, for whatever reason, strange things come to pass and Ms. Brown were to disappear, there is a second member who would remain and would be available to wind up the business if that's the situation that they found themselves in. So this concern that it would be taking another chance like Romo's, I feel, is an unfair comparison, especially because in large part these debts, which were such a concern, were not ones that she had incurred herself. So the ability to sell alcohol is a privilege, and the city has to safeguard that. And the license we're asking to transfer is one that has been sitting unused for quite some time. The business space that they are building out to operate this is the former JT Cigarro's building. It's also been sitting vacant for quite some time. And really this business is seeking to serve an often overlooked corner of the diverse population of Fargo. And we're really just hoping that you're able to kind of understand the history of her credit issues and kind of understand that she's taking care of the parts of her credit that are actually hers, and that this is a fair risk and they would be able to meaningfully operate this business in the city.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, I just had a couple of comments. First of all, our policy is that if she resolved all those, then we're willing to issue the license, and obviously she did some, but I think you have to clear up those other ones, and I think that would probably involve having a lawyer resolve the issue. But I think we have to be consistent and say, you have to get those resolved before you get a license. And so I think it was great that you did the ones that she could control, but I think you have to do those other ones too, from our perspective, to be consistent. And it was 4-1, and I was the one that voted in favor of it, because I think, but we have to be consistent, and you have to, even if it wasn't her fault, it's still her name on the, and that's unfortunate, but you still have to resolve it. So that's just my comments. I think that we have to be consistent, and I think it would be a great addition to the community. It's a great, that building has been sitting empty, but you have to get these things resolved. Otherwise, we are not being fair to everybody else. So that's my comments. And Commissioner Gehrig and I are on the liquor control, so I'm sure Tony has comments too, but those are mine.
We just closed public hearing. Is there anybody else in the public that wants to speak to this license? We'll close public hearing now. We'll have discussion by commission. Commissioner Gehrig, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm torn a little bit. When Dave voted yes for this, I had initially voted no, and I understood the reason why. You want to see if they're going to clear it up, right? I think that's what was the reason for it. I think there's been a good faith effort to clear up the debt that they could. And also, I think the point of it, of that building being vacant and the license being vacant and, serving a corner of the community that might have, there might be demand, I don't know, for this type of building. So I'm leaning towards the way you voted the first time, I think. I think that there is good faith effort to take care of this debt, and hopefully that gets taken care of. It's less debt than we thought they had. So I think I might support it. So
How about the question Steve raised about the LLC? What's the names on the LLC? Do they need to change that as well?
They need to fix that, right?
I would think so. I would defer to our attorney to see if that's a matter of importance, but it is interesting that the international market is listed under Francis Brown and not his wife now, so.
If I may, I think, and Nancy, feel free to chime in if I miss a point. Nancy's been more engaged in all of this than I have. But, I mean, what I think Steve reported was that the husband who was previously the applicant is the registered agent. Registered agent isn't an officer of the company necessarily. They're just a person gets served papers if there were some legal matter. I think the point of it is just that when there were problems with the original applicant, there was a shift over to the spouse, and that's the point behind it. Is there really any change in how the operation is run as the question? And to some extent, if you want to inquire about that, that's fair game to inquire about that. But I think the point behind it is that there really hasn't been a shift to the, two spouses can each own their own property, certainly, but the assumption is that the husband is still involved in the business.
And Steve, there was a question about debts that the ex-husband had, and there's debts that she personally has. Has she cleared all the debts that she personally has? We got copies of 2 done today, but was there everything else resolved?
Well, the background check that we've got doesn't clearly tell me whose debt is whose. The attorney is saying that these aren't her debts; they were opened in her ex-husband's. When the police department did the background check, I would assume that they did the background check under her name, and then these are the debts that showed up. So,
Steve Baird, are all her debts cleared up? Not the ones that you said the ex-husband had, because I see 6 or 7 debts when I looked at Chief's report. So,
The debts that are not disputed as having been opened by someone else have been cleared, yeah. There were 2 which were in active collections, and those are the ones that were hers and have been cleared.
And have been cleared. So if I look at her credit report right now, she's got all her stuff taken care of.
I believe so, yes. Whatever's left on there is things from the previous marriage.
You're still going to find on the report marital debt. They're just
Yeah.
contending that she
Because they
doesn't
were
take it.
married, yeah.
It'll come up under her name because the accounts were opened under her name.
Any other questions of the commissioners? Mr. Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious, I'm not sure who would answer this, Steve, maybe you, but once somebody gets a license, what type of criteria what expectations do we have relative to credit history or to these measurements for them to keep the license?
we typically do not review their credit history beyond the initial application and issuance. So I would say that going forward, when renewal comes or something like that, we're not going to look at their credit.
So it's conceivable we have a lot of businesses out there with a few $100s of debts here and there that we're not tracking or aware of?
Oh, absolutely.
So if a business eventually declares bankruptcy, can they still sell the liquor license?
Can they sell the liquor license? I'm not sure the answer to that, if they declare bankruptcy. So I will say that in Eric, what was the year, 2008? Or 2014?
14, I think, yeah.
14? In 2014, we said that any licenses issued after that time would revert to the city if a business were to close. So that would be the case in
It would
something.
come back to the city.
Yes.
Mayor Strand.
Are the applicants here? I wouldn't mind hearing from them or introducing ourselves to them.
Hi, my name is Corey Schultz from Ashley, North Dakota.
My name is Balu Brown from North Dakota.
Could you tell us a little bit about your business plan?
Business plan is to have a international African restaurant where we have multiple chefs on board, providing different ethnic foods from Africa. And then also, my wife is personally like the #1 female vocalist in Ghana, and she's a big musician over there, songwriter, a lot of music videos, and she's going to be taking the stage regularly in the restaurant and nightclub. It's not going to be really a nightclub like other typical nightclubs, but we'll be wanting to serve some alcohol for people that want to come and listen to music and eat a good meal from Africa, African chefs. So that's kind of the layout of what our plan is for the restaurant, nightclub.
Any other questions, Commissioner Strand?
I do have one. I'm not sure if this is Chief Todd or whom, but is having a previous felony an automatic disqualifier?
When we adopted the guidelines, we looked at a 5-year period. So if it was within 5 years, then it was an automatic disqualifier.
And this was how many years ago, remind me?
4 years on the original applicant. Corey had one, but his was 15 or 20 years ago. So that's beyond time.
Commissioner Grinberg, any questions on your part?
Nope.
I have a motion, please.
What want to do, Dave?
I'll make a motion to approve the license.
I'll second that.
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion?
I guess the one thing I would encourage is to have your attorney help try to resolve those issues, because we could make that conditional, but I think that would be good just for your long term. I'm not going to make that a motion, but I think that needs an attorney, and my advice to you is to get that cleared up, because it's just, that's not a good thing to let.
It cleans it up, cleans up your record.
Right, so.
Any other discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Garrick?
Yes.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Mahoney?
Aye. Next item, application filed by Crave Hospitality Fargo to Crave its Class FA alcoholic beverage license located at 3902 13th Avenue South, 3643. Steve Sprague to explain as well.
So this is an application for an FA license. This is our license that allows full alcohol, allows a bar, that does require food sales to exceed alcohol sales. We're excited to have Crave come to the community. They're going to be in West Acres. The renovation is well underway. They did the background check. There are absolutely no items or issues of concern, and so it does come to you with a recommendation of approval.
Is there anyone present who wishes to speak to this license? Anybody wish to speak? If not, we'll close the public hearing. Do I have a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Roll call vote, please.
Garrick?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. We have C, D, E, F, and G that are all continuations. If it pleases the commission, would you like to vote on all 5 at the same time?
I'll move through C through G to continue.
Is there a second?
Second.
Since there's no public hearing, we could just go ahead with that, Eric, right?
Correct, yes.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Garrick?
Yes.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Item H, renewal plan for District 201901 for reconstruction of alley and utility line located within the 100, 200, and 300 blocks of Roberts Alley in downtown Fargo. Jim Gilmore to explain.
Thank you. At your April meeting, you had directed staff to begin work on financing and the agreements necessary for the relocation of power lines in Roberts Alley between First Avenue North and Fourth Avenue North. As Eric Johnson provided some background information to you later in May and noted that in order for the city to use city funds to assist with this project, we would need to use urban renewal powers, and in order to use those urban renewal powers, you needed to have a renewal plan that would be adopted that would authorize the use of the funds for those power line relocations. And so what you have before you tonight is the renewal plan. Many of our renewal plans also have tax increment financing districts. This does not. This is more like the renewal plan that you use for City Hall to provide the authorization to use essentially those same urban renewal powers to borrow money for the City Hall. I don't know if I need to go through the renewal plan in detail. It's quite simple. It notes that there's deteriorating conditions on the blocks, and the plan is to relocate the power lines and reconstruct the alleys. The alley reconstruction costs are being special assessed. The other is a cost share agreement with Kilbourne providing some of the costs, Excel providing some, and the city providing some, as outlined what you were looking at in April. If you adopt this, then Assistant City Attorney Nancy Morris can address the draft agreement with Kilbourne Group and Excel for that specific cost share agreement. So, do you have any questions?
Any questions, Gilmore? Mr. Grinberg, any questions?
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
We should open the hearing and close the hearing.
Yeah, he's right.
Oh, sorry. Is there anybody in public who would speak to this? Is there anyone in public who wants to speak to this renewal plan? If not, now I'll close public hearing. Further comments? Mr. Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. And, you know, to keep it simple, we have two projects that kind of look like one. We have the concrete and the alley restoration, and then we have the power lines. Is that right, Jim?
Yes.
And the concrete restoration is a shared program where it's special assessed to the affected businesses. And the power lines isn't special assessed. If you could just help me understand why we didn't special assess that. And why, if that's what I'm trying to get my arms around. Why that isn't a special assessment versus a general assessment to the entire city?
We did discuss that, and I don't know, Eric, do you want to address that? It seemed like that wasn't something we could special assess, so that's correct.
Right. There's some issue about being able to special assess, and then secondly, there were some that were not willing to accept special assessments, and it seemed appropriate then to go in that direction.
You mean who? Some of the businesses didn't want to be assessed?
Right.
Is that their decision?
Well, it requires somewhat unanimous approval for the project because it involves a private entry into the private property and so forth.
I think,
Eric, you have to go through the difference between utilities. We can special assess the road, we can special assess the alley, but there is a difference when you get into utility.
Right.
You have to explain that to John. I know you said right to me, but.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, there are things that are eligible for special assessments and, roads and, sewer lines and so forth, sidewalks. But the utility relocation isn't something that's eligible for that unless it was done by agreement.
They could get 100% agreement of all the owners, so the way to do this is you do, Jim, you want to explain what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, for some of the owners, certainly welcome the relocation of the power lines. I think other property owners thought, the electricity works just fine now, and I don't really want to invest anything in a change. And so, the city participation helps them make adjustments to maybe they need a different service panel because the type of electricity that's in the alley now is somehow different than what they had before. And so this incentive for them will get them to go along with the overall reconstruction and removal of the power line. Otherwise, we'd be left with two systems, one underground and one above ground.
So the issue that came up is that not all the owners would have liked to do that, and it seems to a lot of us that whether you bury the power line or run it overhead, it should be the same type of power. What we find out is a lot of these older buildings, you have to update the circuitry within the building. So the idea for the city is that we're going to increase tax revenue because you're going to have all these shops along the alleys and the power lines are out of the way. So this is typically, in a sense, I think Dave Pipcorn is a pilot in a sense to see how it works, what happens if you bury the power lines, and if that helps increase cost revenue, which we'll find as time goes on.
There are really two benefits to relocating the power lines. First of all, that visual appearance and reliability, but secondly, in Roberts Alley, by getting the power lines out, it'll allow this newer Kessler building to be built closer to the alley. I think some of the power lines may actually be on that private property, and otherwise you need a certain setback from those power lines, and it reduces the size of the building that you can place there.
Mr. Garrick.
John, if I'm not mistaken, we're the two who voted against this last. So just keeping it out there.
So Mayor, I'm sorry, Commissioner
Commissioner Strand.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Peckborn.
so we've been working on this, I think we were looking back 7 or 8 years, and the cool thing is, when we first started working on this, there was an alley, and then there was a bare parking lot next door. And now it's a $44 million structure with all kinds of stuff going on. And so this is, it's a pilot program because we need to bury all the overhead power lines. I live in North Fargo, and a lot of the older parts of town, we have overhead power lines. That's been 100 years of technology. We want them all buried. And all the neighborhoods, the trimming that they do on our trees, they wreck them. And trees are a precious commodity in Fargo, North Dakota. And so the long-term vision is to have XL bury all the residential power lines. But in the downtown, it's a lot more difficult. It's going to be the most expensive and the most technical. And so this was our first attempt. And there was a lot of business owners that, like Mayor Mahoney said, I'm good. My electricity is fine. I don't want to do this. But to do this all at once made the most sense. To get everything buried, to upgrade all the infrastructure, that was why we chose to do it this way. I do think it's a pilot program, and we have to see how it goes. But all these overhead power lines, if you look at the pictures from 100 years ago, it's the same damn power lines. You got to be kidding me. And so I know Tony has a conflict because XL is like, we're upgrading their stuff as part of this project. And I think that gives us all a little bit of heartburn because it's like, are you kidding me? That transformer is the same picture from 100 years ago, and it's still up there, and now we're going to pay for a new one. So I do agree there's a little bit of that, but you have to look at the big picture. Roberts Alley, when that gets done, all the way from Main Avenue up to 6th Avenue, that's going to be the coolest thing in all of North Dakota. People are going to come and go, we're going down to Roberts Alley, and we'll see you there. All the people, we already use it a ton. And now there's businesses in the alley. It's crazy. And so it's a great thing. I know there's some heartburn with it, but it's a great thing. And so I would encourage my other commission members to vote in favor of it. I will.
Mr. Strand.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not opposed to the project. I think it's a great project. I celebrate our downtown and have looked at those power lines for years. I just don't know that it's the public's responsibility to pay for it for everybody in the city. It's almost $1 million, so while we say there's some affected businesses that don't want to be assessed, I'm guessing there's some citizens that wouldn't want to be assessed either, but they're going to pay it. That's my problem with this. I love the project. I think it's going to be a great improvement downtown. I just don't like the financing method where we're putting 900 and some thousand plus, the biggest portion of all, to everybody. That's my problem. That's the only issue I have is the financing mechanism. I think it should have been special or something akin to a special to affected businesses. However, you could do that.
Well, the beauty is when you started out, I don't think we had it, may have been all assessed to the city. Right now, Excel's paying part of it and Kilbourne's paying part of it. So the reality, I want to get to item 3 as we go forward. But this is the first step to be able to proceed in that matter.
Yeah, it's 900 and something, I think, city. Am I correct on that?
Yes.
We have a motion on the floor. Any other discussion?
Was there a second? Okay.
Yep. Roll call vote, please.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Garrick?
No.
Strand?
No.
Mahoney?
Aye. Item 3, receive and file cost share agreement with Xcel Energy, Kilbourne Group, and LLC doing sharing expenses related to burying the overhead power lines and necessary secondary connections. Nancy Morris to explain.
Sure. This is the companion discussion point, and I should have asked Kember to include it with the discussion on the renewal plan, so thank you for pulling it and indicating that this is a companion project. I've been working with Brenda Derrick, who has been in contact with, I'll say DFI. I've got it Kilbourne, but we're going to need to make some edits to that. That's why we're on a receive and file on that cost share. And the Xcel Energy has reviewed it, but we haven't received comments back yet on the cost share. But it does indicate that Xcel Energy would be responsible for the cost. They will pay for it directly, work in kind for the burying of the power lines, and that the city of Fargo would be responsible for the secondary connections to the properties that are not DFI or Kilbourne owned, and Kilbourne DFI will be responsible for the secondary connections to their properties along both of those alley stretches. On the south side of the Robert Street Alley, south of 2nd, there is only one property that is not owned by DFI Kilbourne and that stretch. And so we're working with the property owner there to install that secondary power.
Any questions of Nancy? Do I have a motion?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been seconded. Any further discussion?
Excuse me, Mayor, it's to receive and file, not to approve, is it? Is there a difference?
We pass it, though, or do we just
No,
accept?
we were just looking for receive and file. I think the perception was that there were a few changes that needed to be made, and we just assumed you would want to see something that was closer to final, and it will take 2 weeks to bring back. If you wanted to approve it and authorize further terms as determined by somebody, you're welcome to do that, but I think Nancy felt, I don't want to speak for you, Nancy, but felt.
Can I change my motion to move to receive?
Sure.
Is that okay?
And I can just add that that was, we really thought the next time would be probably on a consent agenda, not needing further discussion. The cost is approximately the same. We haven't seen any change in that. But again, they're still estimates because we are looking at Xcel Energy and on the telecommunications that will need those connections.
So if we didn't want to re-vote it in 2 weeks, what do you use?
No, you would still need to review that final document.
We would, okay, so we just got to receive this tonight.
Yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, I changed my motion, but also Tony has to change his second then, correct, Commissioner? And then the other thing is, I think, I'm sorry. Is that, did you say you changed? Okay, so but the other thing is, I would encourage us to not have this be on the consent agenda, to put it on the regular agenda so we can vote on it, if that's okay.
Okay, just for clarification for the commissioners, what is your motion that you changed to present?
I originally moved to approve, and I changed it to receive and file.
Okay. Commissioner Grinberg, you agreed with the second on that?
Perfect.
Yep, and let me just add that I appreciate everyone's hard work and effort. You know, Commissioner Pepcorn made a point earlier, maybe this has been talked about for 7 years. I know I've been aware of what's been going on for 3 years, and a lot of time and energy has been put into this, and very important. Everybody has some skin in the game, which is one of my 2 cents, and the discussion started. Everybody should have some skin in the game, so.
Very good. Any other
Get it
comment?
done.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Pepcorn?
Aye.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Gehrig?
No.
Strand?
No.
Mahoney?
Aye. Item 36, resolution authorizing wireless telecommunication facility guidelines. It's an amendment to the master attachment agreement for the use of right-of-way encroachment agreement. You're not Brenda.
Not Brenda. Kevin Gorder with City Engineering. Good evening, Mayor and Commission. I was here about 6 months ago. We were talking a little bit about small cells, so I thought I'd just do a real brief update and lead you to some of the things that we're going to change here on the guidelines tonight. But first, the latest from the providers, mobility. We have a meeting this week to discuss the locations they have selected. I say on 42nd Street, it's kind of from Main Avenue and 42nd Street down towards the mall and kind of angle back towards the Petro Stopping Center on 45th and 19th Avenue South. I think they've got about eight small cells they would like to start installing yet this year and get those in place before freeze up. Verizon, obviously, the next item on the agenda is the master attachment agreement approval requested tonight, and Verizon, we're working very closely with Verizon. Tammy Hartman is here with Verizon tonight if you have any questions. She did drive up from the cities. And then AT&T, we just got some suggested edits or comments on some of the master attachment agreements we've sent out to them and some of the language that they're looking at. They sent us a map showing about 40 sites in the North Dakota side of the metro for a potential small cell. They're not all in Fargo. Some are at the airport, some at the Fargo Dome, some in West Fargo. So we're just starting to get into that with AT&T. So that's kind of an update from the providers we're working with right now. One point is I don't think any of them are 5G yet. They're installing supplementing their existing 4G networks is where they're at right now in the city of Fargo.
Thought Verizon was pushing a 5G program, no? San Diego got it, we're not gonna get it?
I think it's coming. I don't know. I mean,
Well, Mr. Chair, can I ask a quick question? So Kevin, do all three of these companies need to have their all separate own? That's what concerns me, is the number of those that are going to be up in our city. I wish that we could just have one set, because I think otherwise it's going to be noticeable. And I've seen them in other cities, and they're noticeable. They don't just blend in. And so that, can you talk a little bit? Is there potential of somehow consolidating that?
Sure, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm Tammy Hartman. I'm with Verizon Wireless. So I'm a network outreach manager. I can answer some of your questions. I will tell you I'm not an RF engineer. I am a real estate person. So I've been working with Kevin and Nancy to work out a deal for us to attach to your light poles. To answer your first question about 5G, Verizon is deploying 5G all across the United States. Small cell is the backbone for 5G. So you have to have small cell first, and then that lays the infrastructure for us to come through and launch 5G when we're ready. Of course, we want to be everywhere at the same time, is how I would answer your question. We don't have a plan to build 5G in Fargo until we have our small cell network built. To answer your question about what it sounds like is more than one carrier on a pole right now, they have to be at a particular height and for them to have connectivity. And because of that height restriction, there isn't right now a possibility for us to co-locate on the same light pole.
Thank you. Want to keep going?
Sure. So obviously the discussions we've been having with the providers, compliance with the FCC order, just to remind you of the order that was in place from about October of last year, resulted in changes. So what the big change in the guidelines we're asking for tonight is the current guidelines do not address new structures in the right-of-way. So there isn't a light pole, there isn't a city-owned structure, but they still want to be in the right-of-way. They want to put up their own pole. So we're asking that be treated very much like if it was one of our poles. The same fees apply, things like that. But instead of calling it a master attachment agreement, we'd call it an encroachment agreement. So that's probably the biggest change with the guidelines that we're asking for. The other items are more kind of housekeeping items, if you will. We had guidelines that had design standards, requirements, but we had another document that we referenced that were design standards. We pulled them all of the guidelines, had one document now with design standards. So that was just kind of a housekeeping thing. And then we added a reference to construction requirements, much like we ask our contractors to have construction requirements. We're asking our providers to do the same thing. So that's really the gist of these changes. If you have any questions, feel free.
Mr. Chair, one more question. So Kevin, is there any way that you can, I've seen them where they're like combined with a stoplight or something, so at least it's mixed together. Is there a way that we can try to require them to have them? Because to me, if they're adding another pole next to another pole, that's adds to the clutter. So is there anything we can do like that?
You know, probably the biggest thing is the FCC order, and I know Nancy has a, but it's really that FCC order is really just dictating that they can really come on our right away and do things that they need to do to implement this technology. We're trying to have some control so we can kind of address that. I think if you got into the bones of the ordinance, I think it does say we encourage co-locating right in our ordinance. As you heard Tammy speak, it's really, right now it's not the possibility to do that, but so we're trying that. We're trying to work like Verizon's and really, as they've been talking to us and just trying to get a feel for how they're approaching their rollout, trying to work with them so we can kind of maybe help pick some sites, walk some streets, look at where we can put them that aren't so intrusive. Hopefully the walkthrough this week with mobility can kind of help us with that as well. But again, if it comes down to that, the requirements from the federal side are really tying our hands a little bit.
But to his question, if you wanted a stoplight pole, if you could expedite that, they would try to work with you?
Yep, I think right now they would really like to put it on our light poles, use existing stuff, whether it's a bus stop shelter, things like that.
And then how heavy are these attachments they put up?
I'm going to say around 75 pounds.
Okay.
Give or take.
Commissioner Strand.
Thank you. You know what, I'm kind of in appreciating Commissioner Pepcorn's questions, because what I'm having trouble doing is visualizing what this will look like. I mean, when we're reading these descriptions, it doesn't tell me how it's going to look in front of somebody's front yard. or down their street or in their neighborhood. And I'm concerned about unintended consequences of us opening up and accepting a federal policy, and then later on our own people going, do you know what you did to us? So that's my concern.
Right. Yep.
A question I have received from 3 people at least now, and I need to ask it. There are folks out there that have really serious concerns about the safety and efficacy of 5G technology and the impacts on on people. At what point do we get apprised of that science and technology so we're comfortable knowing that we're not embarking on a path that could do some harm health-wise to our own people down the road?
There's a lot of literature out for both that side and the other side. Obviously, as you look at it, you find a lot of things on the internet. I guess I don't know if I have an exact answer to that. You can see kind of both sides if you go out there and Google it. So,
Could you come back at a later time and give us a report on that, just a plus minus of that? I'm sure Verizon, AT&T must have
we could put some
some
stuff
stuff, just that, and I think also, can you bring us what kind of polls and stuff they're doing? I think you've done that before, but
yeah, so when I was here
maybe
back
it's
in
an
January,
education.
I did have pictures in the presentation. I was going to try to keep it short and sweet tonight, so I didn't put them in this time. So I probably, in retrospect, probably should
Show
have
them
one
next week,
picture.
next time we meet.
Okay.
Any other questions?
This is Tony. This is Tony. I've made Todd Cranda, who was over recently with this point, and some others from the industry. I'm not sure I've met the person from Verizon in the room tonight, but I specifically made a request at a future commission meeting, Commissioner Strand's point, that we have a presentation on 5G, because there is 2 sides of the debate. A recent conference I was at in Baltimore, the high demand on bandwidth and speed and streaming video and the UAS network coming across the country is going to require no lag time in service. And so 5G, as I understand it, is going to be paramount to technology growth all across the United States. And an example just of what's going on in North Carolina and in Boston, they're actually delivering, and the mayor would appreciate this, they're delivering organs with drones from one point to the next point for transplant into patients. So as this technology continues to flourish and grow, we're going to need to understand the impacts of it, to the point of Commissioner Strand. But I think we should have, whether it's a brown bag or a 15-minute presentation at a commission meeting, would be helpful.
Very good. Any other comments? Do I have
Just
a
one
motion?
comment. We did some help. We got an example of what this might look like on different deployments here. Just a real quick for you. Just a Google image.
Thank you. Do I have a motion?
I move to authorize this guidance.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Expectation of the group would be a little more discussion on the 5G, either a brown bag, or if we could have it at the commission meeting for 15 minutes, be fine. Okay. Roll call vote.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Pepcorn? Grinberg?
Aye.
Strand? Mahoney?
Aye. Engineering, Brenda, are you up? You are here.
I'm gonna step in real quick.
Okay.
So what I believe you just voted on was the resolution. I wasn't sure if that was actually on the master attachment agreement and the addendum to that master attachment agreement for the encroachment. So what you have before you
what was
is
your
is
intent?
the
The resolution and the amendment?
I was trying to do the suggested here. So the amendment, the resolution authorizing.
So Kevin had presented to you the resolution authorizing the wireless telecommunication facilities guidelines. And if that was the motion, then I would also like to present to you the master attachment agreement and encroachment agreement that we have been negotiating with Verizon. I believe that would need a separate motion.
Okay, I'll move to approve that too.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded again. Do you need any further discussion, Nancy, on that, or no?
No, unless I'm available for questions if you have any questions about that agreement.
Roll call vote.
Gehrig?
Yes.
Grinberg?
Aye.
Pepcorn? Strand?
Yes.
Mahoney?
Aye. Now we can move on to the engineering report. I think you've got pictures today, so
I have
you've got some
drone-
kind
I
of
have
heaving
drone
on
video.
45th Avenue as well, is that right?
Yes.
How long will traffic have issues on 45th Avenue? You had a heave in the street. Oh, you're going to get to that. Thank you.
You
Okay.
asked me to add it.
I know
and
the public's
added
going to
it.
ask, so.
So I'm just going to quick jump on the areas that the public can keep track of all of our construction projects on Twitter, Facebook, and Fargo Streets. Downtown projects, I want to quick talk about those. Block 9 is progressing well, and so they are in Broadway right now doing their utility connection along with the realignment of the curb. Roberts Alley reconstruction will start south of 2nd Avenue about mid-August, but there is some localized work being done in the Roberts Alley to the north by the Fargo Theater, and that is to support that bearing of the overhead power line. There will also be about the second week of August, mid-August, the closure of 2nd Avenue. So there's lots of stuff going in a small area.
On Broadway, then, will the sidewalk be completed on Broadway? When you say realignment, will it be finished as they have done in 2nd?
So on the west side now, there won't be diagonal parking, it'll be parallel parking, or on the east side, excuse me, there'll be parallel parking once they're done. So the curb's getting moved out to give that a wider sidewalk on the east side. They aren't going into 2nd Avenue right away. They're gonna be doing some additional work and then they'll be moving to 2nd Avenue. I think I heard around September-ish. Traffic impacts, as you guys are all aware, 32nd Avenue and 45th Street, our signal controller was hit. It was out of service for about 12 days. 6 of those days were due to shipping errors. So in response to that, today at Finance Committee, we requested a sole source to purchase 2 additional controllers to have in stock here, so that if it happens in the future, we can just pour the base again and put the controller on. We're also evaluating the intersections to install protective barriers around the controllers, especially at our major intersections. So unfortunately, instead of this happening last week, it decided to happen this weekend after we did finally get the intersection open, is we did have a buckling on 45th Street on the southbound traffic lanes. It appears that the buckling's occurring about where our loops were sawed in. It looks like we've got a random crack there, and that's where we've had the failure. Dakota Underground will be in there this week making those repairs, so we'll try and get those done as quickly as possible and get those lanes back opened. About middle of August also, our levee project just on the south end of Belmont will be starting, so I wanted to give you guys a heads up on that. And then the last thing I have is a few construction videos. We got them down to a minute, but they're a quick flyover of 52nd Avenue and Main Avenue so that you can see what's all been going on out there. And so this is starting at 45th Street, moving to the west. So you've got 45th, and then you've got 47th Street there. You can see how the arc cuts come in, where you'll take a right, and then you'll turn to make that left-hand turn. And then here we are coming up on the drain, along with the new bridge structures for the drain. And then we'll keep moving west here. They've got most of the westbound lane poured except for the cross intersections. And we're going to be moving here towards Veterans Boulevard. Coming up here. So we are able to pour through the Veterans Boulevard, and then this is looking west of Veterans Boulevard here. And then we'll be coming to, you can see 63rd Street towards the far end, and that's the new entrance to the new elementary school. and the Deer Creek entrance. And then we also did Main Avenue quick for you, so you can see what that's looking like right now. We're gonna start at the 2nd Street roundabout and make our way west. And they were actually able to, they actually had a pour on the western side of the project, so we were able to get that in the video also. So you're able to see here too all the sidewalk work they've already got completed. There's very minimal work to be doing, especially east of 4th Street here. And then we'll come into the 4th Street intersection. And then as they move west here, you'll see here's the Wells Fargo, and then here's the pour that they're doing. And this was videoed on Friday of last week. Both of them were. And then you can see the Broadway intersection coming up here. You can also see, you know, as you look at what we're pouring and paving this year in the Broadway intersection going west, they're gonna have, as we go into phase 2 for next year, those businesses will have really great access having that Broadway intersection open and to the south there.
Really helps us understand how they're getting along, because it's hard to get into that area. But I didn't notice the Statue of Liberty there, because you said you took it last Friday, but I don't see her sitting there.
Well, maybe that one wasn't taken Friday, but she wasn't there.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Commissioner Strand?
Thank you, Brenda. We appreciate these updates. I will ask this routinely, though, and as a reminder, confirming there were no injuries or workplace deaths.
Yep, and there were nothing changed from last week.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Commissioner? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.